Show comes out every single Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock p.m. to 4 o'clock p.m. Standard Time on Josh Correa, including streaming live on www.mixcloud.com/YesR2010 /Rich back once again for another episode, the first episode in the month of May. In a new month, the stretch run of the Rashad Show begins. The season's running down, so I'm just going to give some great shows, continue on with this movement. I got a great guest. His name is George Martin, former New York Giant extraordinaire, played defensive lineman for the New York Giants, was part of the Super Bowl team back in 1986. That's the 35th anniversary of the first championship for the Super Bowl era. The Giants had won in 1986, and he joins via phone. His name is George Martin. Welcome to the Rashad Mitchell Show, George Martin.
Thank you very much, Rashad. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you. First question, where you originally from? Where was you born? Talk about that.
Well, first of all, I was born in Greenville, South Carolina, February 16, 1953, to George and Janie Pearl Martin, and I'm one of 5 children. I have 3 sisters and a brother. My younger brother, Doug, also played in the NFL, played for the Minnesota Vikings for 9 years.
Okay, growing up, like, who were your role models? Who were your influential people that you looked up to growing up?
Well, first of all, I grew up in an era when there weren't a lot of African-American role models. So, aside from my dad, who was my original role model, Dr. Martin Luther King is an individual who had a profound impact on me and someone who I tried to pattern my life after, especially being such a powerful and influential orator and being a man of faith. He is someone who I admired deeply and respected, and I'd have to say that he was probably my biggest role model outside my home.
Okay, in high school, like, were there other sports other than football that you played other than football? Were there other sports?
I was an All-American basketball player in high school, and I also played tennis, and I was an All-State football player, and I always considered my best sport or my favorite sport to be basketball, and I was eventually offered a scholarship to the University of Oregon where I could play both basketball and football, and I chose to do both my freshman and sophomore year, and eventually I settled on just playing football the balance of my college career.
Okay, other than Oregon, were there other schools that you wanted to go to that you wanted to play for in college?
Yeah, I was highly recruited in football, and I was recruited modestly in basketball, and I think I narrowed it down to Wyoming State and UCLA. UCLA wanted me to come and play football, but they wouldn't let me play basketball, which was something that I did not care to do. So in the final analysis, I chose to go to the University of Oregon. It suited my personality. It was a more homogenic environment. The people were really down to earth. And of course, as I said, they allowed me to play basketball and football, and I've never second-guessed that decision.
Okay, so when was the first time, like, who was the head coach you played for at the University of Oregon?
There were some forgettable coaches. I think I had 2 during my tenure there. Dick Enright and Dick Harder was my basketball coach. Dick Enright was the football coach, and they had very mediocre careers there. We didn't have great success as a team, but we had some great individuals that went on and had profound impacts and careers in the NFL. Russ Francis was an individual who I played with. He and I both were tight ends in college, and Russ went on to have an illustrious career with the New England Patriots. And there were several other guys that also had careers in the NFL. But as far as the team back then, collectively, pretty mediocre.
Okay, so your first year at Oregon, Was it in 1972?
I was in 1971.
71. Okay. All right. So 71, and your team went 5-6. So obviously you played with Dan Fouts, who played with Bobby Moore, who actually changed his name to Rashad. What was it like playing with those guys?
It was like playing with heroes and guys who were held in high esteem. They were the stars of the team, and at that time I was playing tight end. So Dan Fouts was my quarterback, and he was a great field general. In fact, he admonished me on numerous occasions because I was just trying to learn the system. But he was a phenomenal talent, and of course Bobby Moore, as you say, who eventually became Ahmad Rashad. He was sort of like this superhero, and we weren't allowed to exist in his circle because he was just such a superstar back in those days. But it was nice to have that African American role model who was treated like a superstar, who was given all the advantages of a superstar, and of course he went on to have a very dramatic career with Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, on your first season, your squad went 5-6. Notable win is that you beat Southern California, 28-23. Do you have any recollections of that game? Beat Southern California.
As a matter of fact, I do. It to me was, I think it showed you the kind of talent that we had on the team because, being able to beat perennial power like Southern Cal back in those days was a yeoman's task. And we were able to get all our ducks literally and figuratively lined up in a row that day. And yeah, it was a huge victory for us. And it gave a lot of individual confidence in a lot of guys because we played close to the best and beat the very best that day. And I just have great memories of that victory because it was few and far between. So it was something that really reigns permanent in my memory bank.
Okay, yeah. So you went 5-6. So let's fast forward to the second year, the '72 team. You went 4-7. Now you're starting tight end, correct? So this was the first year that you was a starter at tight end.
Yeah, that's correct. As a matter of fact, because we were so talented at tight end, Russ Ransom was 6'6", and he was an All-American track superstar. And he was built like Hercules. I mean, this guy was phenomenal. I have a great respect for Russ. But they thought that it would be a waste of talent to have us both playing tight end. So, in their estimation, I was the better receiver, so they allowed me to play tight end, and they switched Russ to linebacker. Unfortunately, Russ did not make that transition to linebacker, so they switched him back to tight end, and they moved me to defensive end, and the rest of the is history.
Okay, went 4-7. Obviously not not a good season that year in the '72. But the fact, yeah, I'm here. Yeah, like I was saying, 1972 wasn't a great year. Obviously, we went 4-7. Yeah, I'm here. You hear me? Hello?
Yeah, you faded out. I couldn't hear you.
Yeah, like I was saying, the 1972 season was a 4-7 season. What went wrong in that freshman sophomore year? Like both of those years wasn't as successful. Like yes, you had talent, you had a lot of talent on the offensive side, but what went wrong in those first 2 years at Oregon?
I think it was, and I'm not pointing to the shooting finger unnecessarily. I think that we were disarrayed as far as our coaching staff was. We had a coaching change about that time, and it was quite clear that we did not have the dedication or at least the commitment to having a full, competent coaching staff as our competition did in Southern California or in other regions. So we went through a head coaching change eventually, and I think that it's obvious when you have Ahmad Rashad, a guy like Tom Graham, who was eventually drafted as a linebacker in the third round from Denver Broncos. You have a guy like Donnie Reynolds, who was an all-star running back and eventually had an extended career in Major League Baseball. You have the components there, but when you don't have the head coach or the coaches who have the intelligence to put it all together, I think it makes for a very frustrating race.
Okay, so the next year you go 2-9, then you go 2-8, 2-9 again. 1973 and 74, you go 2-9. So now let's fast forward to your, NFL career. You go to the Giants, but before that, were there other teams, going into this NFL draft in 1975 that you want to play for other than, the New York Giants?
Well, just a correction. I did not necessarily. As I said, I had a basketball player's mentality, and I was totally uncertain whether I could ever have a career in the vast unknown, you know, NFL. So I was a bit skeptical, and I remember that I was getting a lot of calls from recruits and teams telling me that they were going to draft me. As a matter of fact, the day of the draft, the day before the draft, I had an extensive conversation with the New England Patriots. They were interested in switching me back and drafting me as a tight end, and they told me to stay by the phone because they were going to make that decision that day. And I very anxiously stood by the phone, and I waited and waited and waited. And the ironic thing about this is that during my college career, Russ Francis did not play college football in his senior year. He opted out for whatever reason. And as I was waiting by the phone to hear from the New England Patriots, it came over the radio that the New England Patriots had just drafted in the first and second round, drafted Russ Francis. So, that eliminated my career being drafted in the early rounds, and subsequently on the second day of the draft, I was drafted by the New York Football Giants in the 11th round, which they don't even have 11 rounds these days.
How did it feel like, being, drafted that, low? You went to the 11th round. Obviously you felt that you wanted to play basketball, but how it felt just to, go that low in the draft in 1975, being an 11th round pick?
It didn't bother me. I figured there was some justification for it because, as I said, I didn't fancy myself as a football player, and I always thought that the NFL was this league that was so far in advance of college football that I didn't belong there to begin with. But a funny thing happened during the first orientation that all of the draftees brought to New York, and it was quite revealing to me to see that here it was, all of these young, talented guys brought into this new environment, and immediately they set up a caste system that really separated us because whereas the vast majority of us were flew in, and put on a bus to go to training camp, the number one and number two draft choices were brought in by limo. And that immediately set a division between the haves and the have-nots, as it were, because a guy by the name of Danny Bugs, who was out of West Virginia, was one of their big stars, and he was treated as such. And unfortunately, Danny did not have the wherewithal to make that transition to the NFL. And a guy by the name of Al Simpson that year was their number one selection in the second round. And he was woefully inadequate to play offensive tackle, as it were, at that time. So the irony is they always kept me as an 11th round draft choice after practice to work with Al Simpson, their second round draft choice, to try to make him better and to get him ready for the season. But what invariably happened was that my skills improved dramatically to the point where I became a starter after the first game in NFL. So that's just good fortune and good luck and being at the right place at the right time as far as I was concerned.
Your first year head coach, first time, obviously being in the NFL as a New York Giant, your coach was Bill Arnsberger. Talk about what kind of coach and guy he was to you and the New York Giants, Bill Arnsberger.
Bill Arnsberger, unfortunately, was, again, I'll say this, and I mean criticize for it, but Bill Arnsberger was woefully inadequate to be head coach at that time. And I know you have to go through a learning process as a head coach. He had come from Miami, and he was very heralded as a defensive coordinator down in Miami. But they eventually found out that he had some huge deficits when it came down to being a head coach. And he really had some issues, some personal issues relative to people of color back in those days, and they were later brought out the reasons why. Neither here nor there, but I think it inhibited him from putting the best group of talent out on the field, and subsequently the New Giants made a decision to replace Lawrence Barker, and they terminated him because our first year, I think we were 3-12-1, which is an abysmal track record, and they decided to bring in John McVay, as you know, who subsequently had a tremendous career with the San Francisco 49ers, but his start with the Giants was pretty mediocre as well.
Yeah, according to the research, your first year as a Giant, the Giants was 5-9. You finished fourth in the NFC East. Yes, he was 5-9. Let's fast forward to the previous year, the next year, the 1976 season, 1976. Um, so yeah, like you said, John McVay was the coach. In '76, you go 3-11. So that's the second year. Um, but you had, a Pro Bowler and vet Brad Van Pelt. Talk about, to those who don't know who Brad Van Pelt was, talk about the linebacker that he was, because he was a Pro Bowler on that team. Talk about Brad Van Pelt.
Well, I think any Giant fan will tell you that the hallmark of our team has always been our defense. We've always had good defenders, and we've always had a very strong and sterling group of linebackers. And Brad Van Pelt was the first of those superstar linebackers, and I was fortunate enough to have been the left defensive end, and Brad was also our strong side linebacker, which was on the left side. So I had the great privilege and honor and protection of being next to Brad, who was just a phenomenal athlete. I mean, he was everything in college, and he had a great collegiate career, and he continued that greatness in the NFL. And they could not block him. He was a great pass defender. He was a guy who would sacrifice his body almost on every play. And us as teammates would always marvel at Brad because he would finish every game as a bloody mess. He was bleeding somewhere. And that's what he became known for, because he sacrificed his body, and he just really gave it all. And I was glad to be able to share that side, because we had the dominating left side of the defense back in those days.
Okay, the 1978 season, your team goes 6-10. John McVay still the coach, and obviously that year was known as for the game against the Eagles, the miracle at the Meadowlands. Talk about that game, because that was a turning point for the franchise when Herman Edwards scored the touchdown. Talk about that game in 1978.
I will talk about that. Before I do, you talked about 76. 76 was also the year that we had drafted Harry Carson. And Harry Carson came out of Carolina, and he was a very good prospect, but he wasn't that superstar at the time. And he came in and had a tremendous impact immediately at middle linebacker. So our linebacking core was beginning to solidify itself as the dominant aspect of the New York Giants, and that was because of, as you previously mentioned, Brad Van Pelt and subsequently Harry Carson. But in the year you're talking about, in that particular game against Philadelphia, I mean, we had suffered some very dismal and abysmal losses. And this happened to be a home game, so it happened right in the Meadowlands, and there was a lot of pressure to begin with our coaching staff and with our team. And we were leading this game, and we were ahead in the fourth quarter with virtually seconds to go. And all we had to do, Joe Pisarcek was the quarterback at the time, and Larry Zonka was part of that squad. He was a fullback. So there was a play that was sent in from the sideline that Joe Pisarcek, with particularly Larry Zonka, objected to, because with so little time on the clock, they felt that all you had to do was kneel and run out the clock and not run the play. So there was a discussion in the huddle, well, should they or should they not run the play? And Joe Pisarcek called the play as he was supposed to. And Larry Zonka was supposed to get the handoff, and he just thought that Joe was going to kneel, and he never got the handoff. And as you say, the ball was fumbled and bounced up perfectly to Herman Edwards, who went on to become an NFL great as coach and player. And he picked the ball up, and he ran in for a unmolested touchdown, which we lost the game. And what people don't know, a lot of people don't know, is that immediately after that game, there was so much riding on that game for a number of reasons, because we were favored to win. It was a home game. We were leading with seconds to go in the fourth quarter, and we wound up losing on the stupidest handling of a play ever. There were death threats, immediate death threats that were sent to the coaching staff pretty much across the board. Joe Pisarcik and Larry Zonker received death threats to the point that they were put on an airplane and shipped out of the state for a period of time until the anger subsided.
Wow, that's an interesting story. Wow.
It happened.
You still there?
Yes.
Okay. So now let's transition to the 1979 year. The state of transition, get a new head coach, Ray Perkins, and George Young, who was definitely an instrumental force in the Giants being, a dominant, big time franchise again. Talk about Ray Perkins, what kind of coach he was, and also talk about George Young, the kind of GM that he was for the Giants.
First of all, I got to pay tribute to Ray Perkins, who recently passed away, unfortunately, and he had a profound impact on the New York Giants, although not in the manner that people might think. Because we were in such disarray at that time, as you say, we replaced both the head coach and also the general manager with Ray Perkins and George Young. And there was one thing that the organization felt that we were sorely lacking, and that was discipline. So Ray Perkins was brought in to be the disciplinarian. George Young was brought in to be the brain trust. And as a result, Ray Perkins, he was a ruthless and almost inhumane disciplinarian. During that period of time, I lost my starting job because then we also switched defenses from a 3-4 to a 4-3. He didn't think that I would be a qualified starter. So he put me in as a specialist, a pass specialist, after 7 years of being a starter. And so he came in and he changed everything, and he installed a lot of discipline, which, by the way, we needed, but you could have done it with a little bit more humanitarian perspective. But he turned the franchise around by making sure that those stupid plays and those mistakes that were prone by the Giants were eliminated. And of course, he always saw his position as head coach of the Giants as a stepping stone. His real desire in life, Ray Perkins, was to be the head coach of Alabama, which was his alma mater. He wanted to go down and of course, replace the legend who had been down there for so many years. And I think in his third year with the Giants, he got that opportunity, and he left the NFL in order to go back to Alabama and become the head coach and replace Bear Bryant.
Yeah, and also wanted you to talk about George Young, the GM, because he became the Giants GM in 1979. Talk about his contribution to the Giants.
George Young, again, I think he came from Miami. He had a great reputation of not only disseminating talent for the NFL, but he had a very shrewd way of doing it, and he was sort of he was viewed as being unorthodox at the time. And so he came in, and I think he made some very good draft selections. He analyzed our deficits. He did it very intelligently, and he made some very good decisions relative to making the New York Football Giants better. Of course, it's famous that there was some immediate conflict between he and the subsequent head coach and eventual Super Bowl winner, Bill Parcells, because George Young thought that he had the formula for making draft choices and making them that would benefit the team both in the long run and immediate. But Parcells had some ideas of his own, and since those decisions would ultimately impact him immediately, he famously said that if you want me to do the cooking, I think it's only fair for me to buy some of the groceries. And I think he and George Young eventually came to a reconciliation where Bill Parcells had some great influence in who the draft choices were. And as a result of that, we drafted the greatest, in my estimation, individual who ever put on an NFL uniform, and that might include Tom Brady as well, and that would be Lawrence Taylor.
Okay, so the 79 season, also, Phil Simms was drafted. Talk about the first time you ever seen Phil Simms in a New York Giant uniform. What was your, evaluation of an assessment of Phil Simms at quarterback?
Phil might get be drafted on draft day, which is going on now with the NFL. When his name came up and he was drafted in the first round by the New York Giants, he got a rousing round of boos from the crowd, and that's kind of disheartening for a guy who started his career. He came from a little small school, Morehead State, and he wasn't really one of the big time names in the NFL. And I think a lesser man would have broken. But Phil came in and he did not perform well. He had some issues with fumbling. He didn't fit into the scheme initially, and he got hurt. So on top of all that, I mean, every time he'd go into the field, there would be these crescendo of blues coming from the fans raining down on the field. But what I respect about Phil Simms is that, man, is he courageous, and he is tough as nails. And I saw that guy endure all of that, and yet still eventually emerge to become a Super Bowl MVP. And I've told him time and time again that I don't put so much stock on quarterbacks, but in my book, he can play quarterback on my team any day of the week.
Okay, so that 79 season goes 6-10. So let's fast forward to 1980. 1980 go 4-12. Let's fast forward to 1981. This was the turning point, 1981, because you went to the playoffs. But we're gonna start with Lawrence Taylor. This is the 40th anniversary of Lawrence Taylor being drafted as a New York Giant. Talk about the first time you was in the, being in on the same field, training camp, the first mini camp, first training camp, when you saw Lawrence Taylor. What did you think? What struck you when you first saw Lawrence Taylor on the football field for the first time as a New York Giant?
Well, first of all, let me say this. Generally speaking, draft choices are highly overrated, and typically veterans don't put a lot of stock in draft choices, particularly high draft choices. So we normally take the position that until you can prove that you deserve this, we're not going to give you any accolades. And the difference with Lawrence is that his proof emerged immediately. It is a tradition in the NFL, at least it was, that when you got young talent coming in, they don't break into the starting lineup right away. They usually have to earn their stripes on the special teams. And Lawrence came in, and wow, every special team that he was on, I mean, he just absolutely demolished the opposition to the point where he famously said that when he came in, he didn't have an impact right away. It took him about 3 or 4 plays to become a starter, and he's right. I mean, he came in and he distinguished himself on special teams dramatically, both in practice and in the game. And then when he broke the starting lineup, which almost happened immediately, he had a superb impact as that outside linebacker, something which we had never seen before, something which New York Giant fans had never seen before, and subsequently something that the NFL had never seen before. And I will say this, that Lawrence Taylor is the greatest athlete, football player, teammate that I've ever played with, and in my estimation, he could have been an all-pro performer in all 22 positions on the football field.
Okay, I'm gonna get into talk about some games from the 1981 season. A game that stood out that made the team get to the playoffs for the first time in a long time was against Dallas. You beat Dallas. I think it was the last game of the season. You won 13-10. Talk about that game, because that was a huge game. That field goal was made, the game-winning field goal that sent the Giants into the playoffs. Talk about that game.
Well, in order for you to do it, I have to set the stage a bit because, the mindset of the New York Giants was that if we're ever going to be successful, we have to, all victories have to go through Dallas. Dallas was the perennial divisional champions. They always were in the playoffs. They were always either Super Bowl bound or just falling short of it. And our position was that, every January when the Super Bowl is being played, New York Giants fans and players are going to be at home being spectators. And we had been given the charge and the duty, the challenge that a new sheriff was in town. And I remember that they were told us that our performance didn't have to change. That wasn't what made the distinction between us and the Dallas Cowboys. It was our attitude. And we had become used to and accepted the role that the Dallas Cowboys Cowboys were always going to be the perennial favorites, and we were going to be second fiddle. Well, uh, that was something that was drummed into our minds. That mindset was dead and buried, and it would never happen again. And that's what we took into the game against the Dallas Cowboys. And I can remember the pep talk that we got, and it was so affirming, and it was so confident that we were definitely the better team, and that we were going to eventually be the team that was going to be performing in January and eventually in the Super Bowl, and that Dallas was going to be the second fiddle. And I tell you, it went to us like wildfire. That wildfire obviously was extinguished in Chicago, but that was also part of our maturation process.
Okay, next, now you go into the playoff game against Philadelphia. You win 27-21. Talk about the preparation aspect going against the arch rival, Philadelphia Eagles, and talk about winning that game 27-21 in Veterans Stadium in the playoffs.
It was always sort of like if you're going to button up the chin strap and have that dog-eat-dog battle, it was going to be Philadelphia. We had a great respect for one another. It wasn't like Dallas that we absolutely hated their guts. We respected Philadelphia. We knew that they were a very confident team. We also knew that their offense was very, very good. And it was something where if we were going to win and if we were going to be eventual champions, it's one thing to win at home as we did against the Dallas Cowboys. It's another thing to win on the road against a great competitor like Philadelphia. And if we were going to eventually overcome that stigma of being losers, we had to be able to perform on the road. And that's what we did. And I got to tell you that the defense distinguished itself in that game. I mean, everybody rose to the occasion. The linebackers were magnificent. The defensive backs played their hands off. And the defensive linemen did. And by that time, we were generating a lot of confidence in ourselves. And so we didn't go on the field at that point in time thinking that we could win. We went out there with the confidence, knowing that we had the ability to compete against anybody and knowing that we could win.
Okay, so you win that playoff game. Now you go to Candlestick Park and play a team that will be like your arch rival throughout the 80s in a sense, and that was the San Francisco 49ers. Unfortunately, Giants lose 38-24. But talk about that game going against the eventual Super Bowl champion, San Francisco 49ers in 1981, the divisional playoff game against San Francisco. Talk about that game.
That game was a defining marker for us because now you're beginning to judge yourself from the very best in the league. And like you say, they were the eventual Super Bowl champions, and we went out and we played them close to the vest. We competed. We had a great game plan. We had great, I think, anticipation. We went out there and we weren't discouraged. Of course, we were disappointed that we lost, but we knew that when you're building toward a championship, you have to take incremental steps of success. And even though we lost that game, we knew that we were building for the future. And if we could take their best in the playoffs and narrowly lose, that eventually we were going to have the table turned. And that's what happened. And that was something that you don't like to be able to say you can glean something from losing. But in that case, just as it was in the Chicago loss the subsequent year, when we lost up in Chicago, we used that as the building block to say, these were the eventual Super Bowl champions, and we played them to the very best. So if we can increase our performance incrementally, one day we can be champions, and eventually that's what happens. But I don't want to get ahead of the story.
Okay, so 1982 comes around. It's a strike-shortened season. You go 4-5. Talk about that year, man, and then with dealing with an NFL strike in 1982. Talk about that during that season, 1982.
Yeah, being a professional athlete, it's not just what happens on the field that impacts you. It's also the things that happen off the field. And one of the things that you did not indicate was during that whole period of time, I was also the New York Giants player representative for the collective bargaining agreement. And it was also the time that I was being promoted and prompted to be the president of the NFL Player Players Association. So this was time where you had, at least in my situation, you had divided responsibility. You had to become and continue to be a great ball player, but you also had to look at things in the context of a collective bargaining agreement where you had to do what's best for you, yourself and your family, and the future of your teammates. So it was a strike shortened season. We were very adamant about we wanted the things to improve as far as the collective bargaining agreement. We talked about having a percentage of the gross revenue, which was absolutely unheard of back in those times. We got excoriated for it, but we stuck to our guns. We also talked about being able to go back and reward our predecessors in the league and make sure that their benefits were increased as well. And that's something that I'm very proud about. Our pre-59 program back then was saying we want to go back to before 1959 and make sure that those guys who preceded us in the league were also taken care of as far as their pension, their health benefits, their medical benefits, and support for their spouses. So I'm very proud of what we did off the field as much as I am what we accomplished on the field.
Okay, so 1983 rolls around, and obviously you have a new coach. His name is Bill Parcells. Talk about the first time you met Bill Parcells, what like in the beginning, the early stage, as far as being a head coach now and being a head coach. He's always already on the staff, correct me if I'm wrong. I think, was he a linebacker coach? Linebacker coach,
yeah,
right?
Linebacker.
Okay, so now he's transitioning now to being a head coach. So talk about him as a head coach that first year in 1983.
Well, the good thing about that was that Bill Parcells was a known quantity to the organization, and especially to us as the defensive crew. We had the utmost respect, admiration for Bill Parcells, and when he was named head coach, he had been our defensive coordinator for a number of years, and we knew he had the right stuff. We knew that he would bring to the table a certain amount of discipline, but it would be balanced with intellect. And for the first time in my career, at that point in time, Bill Parcells came in and he made it known that if you're going to be a part of the organization, you've got to be as good as you are on the field of play as you are off the field of play. And he made it known that the simple mistakes that were considered acceptable in the past were no longer going to be acceptable. He was an absolute tyrant when it came down to making mental mistakes. He did not accept it. He made sure that if you're going to be a professional athlete, you have to be in all aspects professional. And he did not tolerate people being late. He did not tolerate people being disrespectful. He didn't tolerate people being, ununified. If you were an individual and not a team player, hey, you can play someplace else. You're not going to play for Bill Parcells. So the overall discipline that Bill Parcells established, and also the way he treated everybody, was uniquely different because he had a way of motivating you, irrespective of who you are. And one of the things that he also did, he put an inordinate amount of responsibility on the individuals that he called his guys, or the guys that he saw as leaders. Myself, Harry Carson, and Bill Sims. If there was a problem on the club, Bill Parcells would look to us to correct that problem first and foremost. And that was something that allowed us to grow as leaders, because no longer would we have to look to the head coach to correct the problem. He put it on our shoulders to have the responsibility to correct that problem before it got to his desk.
Okay, so 1983 obviously was not a great year. You go, I believe 3-12-1. So now, let's fast forward to 1984. You go to the playoffs for the first time since 1981. I'm going with some games. The first game you beat Philadelphia 28-27. And then you start off 2-0. You beat the Dallas Cowboys 28-7. Talk about those first two games, because you went up against your division rivals. You got to a great start in 1984, winning against the Eagles and the Cowboys. Talk about that. What recollections, if you can remember those matchups that during that 84 season, the first two games.
Yeah, I wish you could see the smile on my face, because those games represented the building blocks to ultimate championship. And I think it was necessary for us to understand that there are going to be ups and downs. There's going to be ebbs and flows. There's going to be some uncertainty. There's going to be, it's challenging to be able to have a standard of winning, even at a lower level. And the higher you go up that rung, the more the pressure is built. And so we were able to look at the fact that, as they say, uneasy is the head that wears the crown. We wanted that crown. We wanted that Super Bowl championship. We dedicated ourselves to keep getting better. Once you get a taste of victory, as I said, once the first time we went to the playoffs, in '81 I think it was addictive. It was transformative. We wanted to make sure that come the end of the regular season in December, that we had a chance to go on to bid for that championship. And not only was it financially incentivized, it was also that you got to wear the crown of being a playoff team. That you also had the honor of being a division champion. And those kind of things are building blocks to success. And even though you get your nose bloody, because at the end of the day, of all those 32 teams, only one team is going to be crowned champion. But there are some degrees of success that you can be satisfied with if you continue to march toward the ultimate victory, and that's the Super Bowl.
Okay, so let's get into the playoff game against the Rams. You win 16-13. You had to deal with Eric Dickerson. You go on the road and you win. Again, that's the second time at that time that the Giants win a road game against Philly in 1981. Now against the Los Angeles Rams. Talk about that game, winning that game 16-13 in LA.
That was a huge game for us, by the way. A great competitor. At that time, they were a division champion, as were we. And again, the hallmark of a true championship is to be able to win on the road. Going into the Coliseum is a daunting task. All of those fans who are booing you, everybody is against you, and it's just you and your 45 teammates that you have to count on. They had a very good offense back in those days. As you mentioned, Eric Dickerson, man, I can recall laying awake at night thinking about if we don't game tackle this guy, he will embarrass us. Dickerson was, at one time, Eric Dickerson was an impactful offensive player as Lawrence Taylor was a defensive player. And much was made of that matchup, and we knew that we had to come and play our best, or otherwise Dickerson would run, and he'd still be running. So we went out and we made a decision that we were going to game tackle. We were going to all be around the ball, and that was our call. Back then, everybody's got to be around the ball. And although Dick had, I think, a decent game, he didn't have the game that he would normally have, and then subsequently we kept him in check, and we won the game. And again, that was a big feather in our cap, not only team-wise, but especially from the defensive standpoint.
Yeah, it was a big win on the road going into LA and winning 16-13. Trying to check to see how many yards Dixon had. Yeah, he ran for 37 yards on 12 carries, and he had a fumble that cost him. So, yeah, you're definitely right about that. Let's see.
Yeah, that was a thing. I talked about our linebacker core. You can't beat Eric Dixon if you don't have a good linebacker core, because the offensive linemen are going to keep you engaged. And even if it's just for a microsecond, by the time you disengage an offensive lineman, a talent like Eric Dickerson he's already gone past you. So you got to have a great linebacker core, and we did in order to stop it. And to held up to those few yards, that's a tribute strictly to our linebacker.
Oh, my apologies. I see right here that he had 107 yards and a touchdown, but he only rushed for 37 yards on 12 carries in the first half, including a costly fumble. So he did have 100 yards, but those yards, 37 was in the first half. So,
Yeah. And it's still a tribute to our linebacker core and our collective resistance to it.
Okay, so now you play the San Francisco 49ers again. And this time, unfortunately, lose again. So a great San Francisco 49ers team, a very underrated, great team. They went 15-1. They were a down team. I think the only loss they had was to the Steelers. And you lose 21-10. But you hung in there, but you fell short. Talk about that game against the 49ers in '84.
There always going to be those heartbreaks. And although it wasn't as big as the Chicago Bears loss that we had, it was nevertheless a derailment of our aspirations to go on and be better. But you can't allow yourself to to delve into disappointment. You've got to look, and Parcells always says this, there's got to be a learning experience. If you don't glean something from that loss, if you don't take some positivity from there, if you don't really look at those guys and say, how did they do it? And then we want to be able to replicate that when we get in that position again, then it really is a loss. You have to find something of value from losing to the best. And that's one thing that Parcells always, he didn't try to kick us when we were down. We lost a very, very close game. Yes, it was disappointing, but we learned something. We learned that we can do something on the road, we can be competitive, and that we can be considered in the upper echelon of the NFL. And that in and of itself is a big, big moral victory that will help you in the long run.
Okay, so you fall season. He beats the Philadelphia Eagles 21 to nothing. Talk about that game since you finally beat the Eagles 21 to nothing. Do you have any memories of that game, winning 21 nothing in at Giant Stadium?
Yeah, what was surprising was the Philadelphia was a good team, and we considered ourselves to have a great defense. We never thought that these would be out. We thought that they would be at least formidable to the point where they made 7 points, 14 points at best. But to be able to shut a team like Philadelphia out, run the horse team and the great offense, it's really a confidence builder. And they had a great head coach back in those days. So we've got two formidable opponents in Ron Morrissey, the head coach, and here we have a game plan that Parcells has implemented and instituted. And it is important that there's a difference between playing on the road and playing at home. You got that 13th man or that 12th man in the stand doing it for you. Makes a big difference. And our defense rose to the occasion and we shut out a damn good team. And that commands respect.
Okay, the same season, 85, this is a memorable game. This game on November 18th, 1985 against the Redskins. Washington Redskins, that's when Joe Theismann got hurt, unfortunately. Fractured his compound fracture of his leg. He was sacked by Lawrence Taylor and Harry Carson. Remember, talk about that game, your recollections of that game. Unfortunately, you lost that game 21 but talk about that situation at that time when Theismann got hurt.
I look back on it with disappointment because it was a momentum changer. Um, we were actually dominating that game up until that point. And I will tell you that when Morrissey broke his leg, and I wasn't in on that play when I came in. Right after that, and as I came into the game, I looked down and I saw his leg fractured. I saw the blood that was oozing from his sock. I saw the fact that he wasn't in agony, but I guess he'd already gone through the pain barrier, and he was kind of joking about it. But it had a profound impact on our defense, and it affected all of us. And after that play, we kind of lost our momentum, we lost our punch, and the backup came in and had a pretty decent game against us. They eventually won the game, but I can remember it plain as yesterday, looking down and seeing that blue sock football, that deep red blood, and God Almighty, it turned your stomach, and it showed you the type of stuff you have to change in order to be a part of a professional football game. And that's something I'll never forget. That is seared in my mind, and probably everybody who's on the field as well.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the playoffs. You win the playoffs again, and now you play again. San Francisco 49ers again. They're the defending champions, but you handle your business finally against them. Beat them 17-3 at Giant Stadium. Just one field goal. And Joe Morris ran for 141 yards. Did his thing. Talk about that game, that win for the Giants. Finally getting over the hump and beating the 49ers. 17-3 in the playoffs.
It was a bittersweet. It was a great confidence builder, and it was something that proved that we can be dominant. lethargic and overconfident. And we tried to use that as a building block, and we did to some degree, don't get me wrong. But I think we became too confident, too complacent. As we find out later, you have to put it in perspective that every Sunday you gotta earn your bowl this year. You can't rest on your laurels yesterday, and I think that's what we did. We thought that this could be San Francisco, which was not only the division powerhouse, but they were conference powerhouse, and they were probably perennial Super Bowl champions. We thought they'd be in a ride, but you can never become complacent, and that's something we learned after that victory against the San Francisco 49ers, and we learned it hard.
Okay, so now you go to Chicago, so you feel against the eventual Super Bowl champions, Chicago Bears. Most people still to this day think since they are the biggest greatest team ever. So 15-1 has dominated the Bears defense, 14 defense. You get shut out, 21-0. Talk about that painful loss, that experience losing the eventual champion, Chicago Bears.
You know, Rashad, that is the best lesson that we learned, and we learned it the hard way. That was embarrassing. That was disheartening. That was something that we will carry, although we wish we didn't have to, because what the Chicago loss did to us and did for us was to show us what it takes to be a championship team. And I'm embarrassed to say that they beat us every way imaginable. That was a game which Sean Landetta had the magical whip the clock, and the Chicago Bears scored on us. That was the game where Phil Sims and the offense was inept. That was where what we thought was the standard for defense, our defense was giant. We finished abysmal second place, and there were only two teams out there. That's where the Chicago defense literally dominated and dead our offense. To me, I will say this, and I don't say it lightly. At that day, they were the best defensive team we had ever put on an NFL uniform. They were absolutely dominating. They were unstoppable. And that's just the ball players and their defensive coordinator who eventually left. But that's a hard lesson to learn. But I tell you this, after that game, immediately after that game, and I remember as well as yesterday, Barry Carson and myself and captains called the guys up, and we asked the coaches to be in the room. That's how important it was. We had a player holding his feet immediately after the game. And Harry got up there and he preached a sermon that I will never forget. Harry said that the preparation for the next season, 1986 championship season, he said that the preparation for that next season started today. And every guy committed to it. And that to me was a pivotal moment in Giants history.
Okay, so now let's fast forward to that 86 season, that great season, win the Super Bowl. But first, I got to go over some of the games. First game of the season, you go against Dallas Cowboys, you lose 31-28. Talk about that first game on Monday Night Football in '86 to Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, we won the goal, and there was a little bit of disjointedness about that game. We had a holdout that I think Joe Morris was holding out, if I'm not mistaken. He wanted a new contract, and there was some issues with that. So we weren't hitting on all cylinders. They were on the road. They were down in Dallas, and I think we lost in the late moment. They ran a draw play, and they beat us. And we were pissed. We were really pissed because there were some outside elements that we really contributed to losing that game. So that's when Artel called us up and told us we got to be more focused. We can't allow outside elements to penetrate our team. We got to stay alert. And I think that with a team like that initially, that kind of got us, that kind of awakened us. And I think it was good for us in the long run. Although again, it's a lesson that we didn't have to learn.
Okay, so the next game, you win 27 against the Chargers. Get back to your winning ways. Then you travel to the Raiders, LA Raiders. Beat them 14-9. Talk about that game, dealing with Marcus Allen.
Well, you remember Jacksonville because you come back, you bounce back, you were able to face some adversity, and then you come back again to face a very good adversary like the Redskins, but you can never take that game for granted, and yet still won. And that was something to be proud of. That was something that was part of the building block before it opened. That was a success.
Okay, so fast forward to November 17th, 1986, the famous game against the Vikings. Much known as fourth down and 17. Bobby Johnson made that catch. Phil Simms throwing it to him. Win 22-20 on the road. Talk about that game.
You know, it was significant and meaningful for me because I was playing against my brother. Although we didn't play against each other directly, my brother was a defensive lineman as a guy. But, you know, from a family pride standpoint, you know, you always want to demonstrate your best. And because we were bragging rights. I was bragging rights in life. But the important thing was that was a very tight game. It was very close, and you're right. Phil Simms to Bobby Johnson on that third down. Oh my gosh. It seemed like that ball hung up in the air forever. And Bobby ran a deep out route, sent up right on the sideline. And the defender gave him just a little bit too much room, and Phil Simms ran into the needle like I've never seen it before. Bobby made a phenomenal catch to give him the yardage, the first down, and that set up the winning kick for Raul Allegre. Well, yeah, well, we wanted to win that game, of course you would. But, you know, you got to have these plays if you're never going to be a champion. And that was probably the biggest play of that year because it helped propel us to the postseason. So, Phil demonstrated his phenomenal skills. Bobby ran an outstanding route for that first down. Raul came in on the fifth of his leg. No seal the deal for us. And as far as we were concerned, we were ready and on our way after that.
Okay, so next game we play is against the eventual matchup against the Denver Broncos in the win 1960. As you know for your defensive play against John Elway, you get 7 pass. He goes 78 yards. Talk about that play when you did that against the Denver Broncos.
Well, you know, what I did talk about in this whole thing was the fact that I've been a designated passing rusher for the last three or 4 years. And so during that year, the guy who was the running defender, got hurt. And that cut the season from being a starter for that team. So I remember that game. That was a long extended drive. You know, Denver was projected to win, and we had a backup good ball because we weren't sure how we would do against the pass like John Elway. And you know, we had a huge reputation at that time. And so that's what you're talking about in the midst of a long sustained drive, and we were moving towards the end zone, and they were literally about to score on us. And it was a sweet pass that was set out to their right, our left, and I remember the offensive tackle tried to cut me, and I still had my basketball dexterity back in those days. So I pushed him to the ground, and I saw the ball go up over my head, and I incorporated some of my basketball skills and made a one-handed catch. And the moment I catch the ball, my first thought, I was paralyzed. I said, you know, everybody on the field is moving half the reputation faster than I am. So let me get this ball to somebody else to see if we get it to the end zone. And Lawrence was the nearest person to me. But the problem was that John Elway, after he threw the ball and saw me intercepted, he ran to try to tackle me, and he went between me and Lawrence. And the unpardonable sin would have been if I tried to rattle that ball to Lawrence and fumbled it, and the Broncos recovered it. I know that Parcells would continue to traumatize right there on that field. He would kill me, literally. So, instead of me saying sorry, so I started rapping down the field again with the pretext that I was going to lateral to Lawrence. And unfortunately, Elway got close to me, and I pushed him out of the way, and I just kept going. Never thinking I could see it, but I could see that the ball close to the end zone. But I got some great blocks, I got some great protection, and one of the things that people don't know on that play is Mark Collins came down near the end zone, the opposite end zone, and he made the key block, and on the last block to get to the end zone, and he must have ran at least 90 yards in order
touchdown, according to research, you became league's career leader in touchdowns that scored by defensive linemen. That was six. When you scored that touchdown, you always had a knack for scoring touchdowns. You scored 7 NFL touchdowns that came on 3 interception returns, 2 fumble returns, recoveries, 1 lateral return, following a blocked field goal, and 1 offensive pass reception, and then 10 years as a tight end. What made you have the knack for scoring touchdowns like that as a defensive lineman? Because that's a rare quality for a guy playing that position that you play, scoring all the touchdowns that you scored.
Rashad, I think it's a combination of two things. Number one, having basketball ability and having that in my background as an All-American basketball player. But more importantly, it comes to being a tight end, and having the responsibility to catch the ball. What I didn't mention is that when I was in college, we had the number one tight end in the nation on our team and was rated number one. And I was rated number two in the nation as a tight end. So having the ability to catch the ball, having the wherewithal to kind of anticipate where the ball and how the ball was bounced and react, and just having good hands was really one of the things I did my career to, and I'm very much blessed to have had that record at the time. I think Jason Taylor has the record now. I think he beat me by 1 or 2 touchdowns. But it's kind of you mentioned about something like that to show your overall professional.
Okay, December 1st, 1986, you played San Francisco 49ers. You win 21-17, but you had to come back for 17 in a deficit. And that game was known for Mark Navarro. He made a catch over the middle. He was carrying Ronnie Lott on defensive tackle, defensive players on 49ers. And the Giants win 21-17. Talk about that statement game that you had made in San Francisco in '86.
Well, first of all, the Giants was made up of just, I mean, we had great offensive linemen, which were considered the hallmark of our offense. We had great running backs, Gilmore and Maurice Carthon, and great quarterbacks for them. Great receiving core, and Mark Navarro was always one of those guys, the strong, silent type.
this time you beat him again. You know, the 3 points. But this is a beatdown. You beat him 49-3. This game's going for Jim Burke's hit on Joe Montana. You know, Lawrence Taylor returns the interception for a touchdown and just dominate the game. Talk about that dominant performance against the 49ers in Giant Stadium, 49-3.
I can equate that game to the game that we had against Chicago a year earlier. It was a beatdown. It was an absolute beatdown. And I don't think the score was that close, by the way. 49-3. Jim Burke Montana hit him under the armpit and knocked him out of the game. I mean, it was one of, and I wasn't more than 2 feet away from him when he made that hit. And it sounded like a cannon going off. And Montana lost the ball, and Lawrence, he was Johnny on the spot, right underneath it, and he took it back in to score. That play was sort of symbolic of how we played the entire game. It was a beatdown, it was a opening whistle, there was a coronation. I can remember that in playing yesterday. All the confetti coming down from the so delighted and so optimistic that this was our year. We never won a Super Bowl. We had championships up to that point, but that was back in the dark ages. This was an opportunity for us to come into the 21st century and to have a Super Bowl victory. And those didn't know that would be the first four that we would eventually proudly open our trophy cabinet as Super Bowl champions.
Play the Redskins for the third time. You win 17-0. And your business. Talk about, win that NFC Championship game, going to Super Bowl 21. The Redskins 17-0.
Rashad, I wish I could explain to you what that means to a ball player, to as a leader. What that means is that all of your challenges that you face during a season have been met and they've been vanquished. You've earned the right to go on and have perform in the Super Bowl. And by the way, I don't care how long you career you had, Rashad, that is not guaranteed for anybody. I know guys who play 20 years and just got to the Super Bowl. I know guys who got to the Super Bowl and succeeded. And that's almost always a real negative, dark spot in your life because you haven't attained Olympic status as in your profession. Every time I look at the Super Bowl ring, I see it differently than you do in public. You got an item that's encrusted in gold and adorned with diamonds, and it has the name and the insignia of the person who got it. But what we see as champions is the blood, sweat, and tears that go into accomplishing that. And if you don't have one, Rashad, you spend the rest of your life in remorse because it's assumed that you never got it. So that game against the Washington Redskins gave us the opportunity, just the opportunity, to be able to play most prestigious award in the National Football League.
Okay, so let's fast forward to Super Bowl 21. You played Denver Broncos again. You had a tough time this game. You were down, you trailed, 10-7, but you made a big play. Let's fast before that. There was a goal line stand. Carl Banks made some big tackle, and they Harry Carson, Lawrence Taylor made some plays in that goal line stand, like I can remember. But then you made the sack in the end zone for the safety on John Elway. So talk about that. You went out to win 39-20. Talk about those sequences as the Giants win their first Super Bowl in the Super Bowl era, 39-20 over the Denver Broncos.
So first of all, let me talk about the adversity that we had. Because if you recall, Rashad, we came from a cold weather environment. And you say, well, what the heck is happening? Well, we played out in Pasadena, California, and it was some 75, 80 degrees. So when you go from a cold weather climate to a hot climate, that's a hell of a transition that your body has to make. So we went out and line. I yelled over to Howard. I said, Howard, they came. He said, we're going to run an exchange between he and I. And I came to the offensive tackle, he turned up, and he looked at his guard, and he said, yes, here they come. So when the ball was snapped, I went down inside like we wanted to do game, and sure enough, he stepped down inside and closed it off, and I came back out inside and met it out the corner, and it was waiting there for me for John Elway. And by the way, Rashad, that is one and only thing that I've ever gotten in my 14-year career, and it happened in the Super Bowl. And some people think that changed the momentum of whatever it was.
Okay. Are you referring to Eric Howard or Howard Cross? He came years later as the tight end. Or are you talking about Eric Howard?
Eric Howard. My apologies. I said Eric Howard Cross.
Yeah, I think you said. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, Eric Howard. My apologies.
Eric Howard.
But also in it, I gotta say this. Bill Jim, perfect.
Yeah.
Everyone did what deserved the MVP. Bill Jim deserved that day. I didn't 20 or 22, something like that. Passes. But man, that guy was awesome. Awesome in that game. And he deserved to be the MVP. And I could not have been prouder of our offense, Bill Smith, and Mark Navarro, and all the guys
anytime. George Martin did a great job with great stories, great info. Thank you for coming on the Rashad Show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rashad. Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you.